Fantastic. Well, good morning. I'm Barbara Best, and welcome to our latest Capstrat Women's Forum meetup. We're so delighted that you've joined us. Last year when Nancy and I were planning for 2020, we identified an overarching theme for the year inspired by the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote, really culminating in today's event, strides and strategies to make our voices count at work, at home, and our communities. Again, I'm Barbara Best. I'm a founding partner and principal at Capstrat. And I'm also a co-founder of our Women's Forum, and I lead our initiative in the Chicago area. I'm also joined by several colleagues this morning. First, Nancy Rizzuto. She's also a founding partner and principal at the firm, and she's the other founder of our Women's Forum, and Nancy leads our office in South Florida as well as our Women's Forum initiative there.
Morning, everyone.
We're also joined by Allison Bettenville, as she's also a partner of the firm and leads institutional consulting. Nicole Myers is been very involved in the Women's Forum and is involved also in marketing and business development. Kitty Bledschmidt is a financial advisor for our firm. And Kate Corey and Amy Sullivan are both institutional consultants. So on behalf of all of us, welcome. We have an amazing panel of women speaking today to whom we will be asking questions and followed by a Q&A. So please feel free to add your questions to the chat feature and we'll address as many of them as we can in our hour-long program today. So in our work as an independent fiduciary investment advisor, advising on and managing investments for institutions, individuals and families with 2 million or more in investable assets. As of late, we've been especially focused on helping people and organizations better understand these volatile and seemingly irrational markets, and to be a reassuring voice that helps them stay focused on the mission of their money and making sure that they remain on track to achieve their very important goals. In these times, it's essential that we all remain engaged and have these very important conversations. However, when surveys report that over 60% of women would rather talk about their own death than money, we remain concerned that women are not using our voices in a way that serve us or the people and causes that matter most to us. In our Money, Power, and Purpose program that we run for women, we talk about the need for women to be the CEO of their lives, and the boss of their money is an essential component of that. We're committed to helping others gain greater clarity and confidence that they're making the most of their financial resources so they can make their voices and resources count more. So please don't hesitate to reach out to explore what that might look like for you, your family, or your organization. So now let's shift over to the esteemed panel to whom we're so grateful to offering their insights and inspirations with us this morning. So sharing their incredible accomplishments would take another 15 minutes. So I'll hold back a little bit, but I do need to tell you a little bit more about them. So first we have Tanya Hegg. She's CEO and founder of Magnolia Insights, a marketing services company. Demonstrating her advocacy of women and her broader community engagement, she founded TEDx Oak Park Women and is co-founder and president of the nonprofit Parents Against Child Sex Abuse, or PACSA. Alexia Cox is also joining us. She is Deputy Chief Assistant State Attorney in the Office of the State Attorney for Florida's 15th Judicial Circuit, advocating for women in the community for over 15 years, starting with her career as a domestic violence prosecutor. Alexia currently serves on the City of West Palm Beach's Mayor's Task Force for Racial and Ethnic Equality, and she's also on the Board of Directors for the Palm Beach County chapter of the Florida Association for Women Lawyers. Andy Kramer is also an attorney and partner in an international law firm where she is the head of the firm's Financial Products Trading and Derivatives Group and is the founding chair of the firm's Gender Diversity Committee. Andy also co-founded the Women's Leadership and Mentoring Alliance, or WILMA, and has written hundreds of articles and blog posts on gender biases. She and her husband, Al Harris, have written 2 books. The first, recently released in its 2nd edition, Breaking Through Bias, Communication Techniques for Women to Succeed at Work. And a second book, It's Not You, It's the Workplace, Women's Conflict at Work and the Bias That Built It. Okay, so you can tell they have significant experience and insights to share with all of us. So let's start with the first question. I'm going to ask that to each of you, and we'll go to in the order of the introduction just to make it easy, Tanya, Alexia, and Andy. What's the most significant progress you've seen women make since you started your work and life journey?
Hi, Barbara. Thank you. First of all, it's such a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Thank you so much for having me. This is such an important conversation, ongoing, right? So I'm grateful to be contributing today. So this question, I gave quite a bit of thought in preparation for our conversation today. And what really warms my heart is that, you know, I've been on my marketing career journey for 20 years with other, I guess, milestones and accomplishments along the way, like all of us on the Zoom. And I think what gives me the most energy and enthusiasm about the progress has been that there's just more of everything. So more resources for women, more conversation about the challenges and the obstacles that we all go through as women, more inclusivity, even though I know that there's still opportunity there. There's just been like more. But the one that I would say is the biggest highlight for me is around women making moves for other women. What do I mean by that? It's like one of my favorite phrases, like making moves, will you make a move for me? I've seen so much progress, especially I would say more close to my heart in the last 6 years as an entrepreneur. But even through my corporate cohorts, there's more willingness for understanding, you know, to make introductions or to not feel as threatened when, you know, someone might be having a good opportunity and there's just like more support for that individual. More women identifying for themselves, you know, what's important to them, how do they want to use their voice, them finding their people. Me finding my people has helped me get the support that I need along the way, so I don't have imposter syndrome or other things that can get in the way of self-sabotaging a good thing that you've got going on. So I would see that more, even though there's room to grow. That's been really great to see and experience.
I think I'm next. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Barbara, Nancy, for inviting me. So often, you know, having conversations like this, women of color are not invited to the table. And so I really do appreciate you bringing this perspective into the conversation. And sometimes I like to say that sometimes we are invited, but we're not received when we get there. So thank you for not only inviting me, but also receiving what I have to say and encouraging this dialogue. So thank you all so much. So I kind of share a little bit of what Tanya said, in that what I think is so great to see right now with women is that we are realizing the power of our collective voice. So often, you know, women, you know, there was this thing about women not working together to empower one another or always being in competition with one another. And I'm seeing lately, you know, as far as my work-life journey, which began back in 2005, so over the past 15 years, I'm seeing more and more women willing to help other women and to help them advance in their professional careers and in life, period. In addition to that, the other progress that I'm seeing is that women are no longer holding back and waiting our turn. We are not, you know, waiting for the coach to put us in the game anymore. Women are stepping up and saying, you know, I'm ready to take on this challenge. I'm prepared. You know, I'm the person for the job or the position. And we are using our voices to skip ahead. We're not waiting for the first man or the first, you know, the first other person to take on that task. We're stepping up and saying, I'm ready, put me in. I want to be on the field to play the game. And so that to me is a significant step that I'm seeing women make here lately.
And I think it's my turn, Andy. And basically, I agree with everything that you've heard so far, although I'll put a slightly different spin on it, because I think that we've got some very positive changes, but we have a terribly long way to go. And so I don't want to start this off where you all think that everything is peachy keen and wine and roses and everything, because unfortunately it's not that way at all. But it is a million times better. When I got out of law school and I started my practice, one of the first meetings that I was called into, I walk in and the client's back was to the door, and the client said, as I'm walking in, wait a minute, Andy's a girl, I can't work with a woman. And that would never happen today. We've had that kind of progress. But unfortunately, now what we see is that we are invited to the table, as Alexia said, but we're not often then given an opportunity to be heard. And so that's really why I was thrilled to be part of today's presentation and Q&A and discussion. And so what I would say is, to answer to the question, is now we do see more women, and women are supporting each other. But I would suggest that women have always been prepared to help each other. It's just that because our workplaces are biased, it makes it very hard for us to help each other in a way that men don't have to experience, because they don't have that same bias. So we need to be working together to overcome those barriers.
You know, Andy, you've done a lot of research, and I'm curious, is one of the reasons why women feel more confident working together and supporting each other is because there's just more than one seat at the table now?
Yeah, well, that's a key part of it. There's a lot of research which shows that if you have a critical mass, and we could talk about what a critical mass means, it doesn't mean 50%. Maybe it means 3 at the table, no matter how big the table is. If you just have 1 or 2 women, nothing happens. And so as younger women are working their way up, seeing that there are career paths for them is a very important step forward. The other part of it is that women now seem to understand that we come to the workplace with all sorts of different characteristics, as Alexia was mentioning, intersectionality. And we'll talk about that more. But just that we come with different characteristics, different stereotypes are ascribed to us, and we have to overcome all of them. But I think that we're more sensitive to these issues and feel more comfortable because the workplace, even though it is gendered, we get support from each other, like your group here. I mean, we have the Wilma that I formed, where women work together to help each other.
Right. And I think I agree with you, Andy. We've had a lot of momentum, but we need a lot more momentum. So this is a question for Tanya and Alexia. When we talk about owning your voices, what does that mean to you, and how do you demonstrate that in your lives today? Tanya, I'll ask you first.
Thank you. I'm zoning out and my mute button's been on. So I think this is such a terrific question, because the word voice is getting used a lot. And anytime in our culture we start overusing a word, it starts to kind of lose its meaning, or it's not very clear about what it is. And in my realm, right, I'm a marketer, and our objective is always to clearly communicate an idea, an expression to reach that audience, right? So this concept of using your voice is no different for me. I had to kind of sketch out for me like the journey of like how this voice part comes about. Before you use your voice, you have to kind of have something that either stirs you up, or you have a belief, or it might take you a little bit to formulate your point of view, to then get to the step of I want to use my voice, or I have a voice and I want to use it. And ultimately for me, voice is a way to communicate. It's a form of expression. But you have to already have formulated like what it is that you want to say or how you want to go about it to then, I believe, to use your voice in the way that you're intending to. And then the last piece of the cycle would be after you've got this voice, you're using that, and that means to communicate and express a point of view, is the action associated with that. So the voice technically means what's coming out of your mouth, but the reality of it is that there are a lot of ways to express that through different actions. So whether it's you're having a hard conversation, you are sending an email, like I just did yesterday to a magazine. I didn't see diversity. I didn't like what was going on in my industry. I got a response back. I'm like, okay, my voice was communicated through email. So just kind of this nice cycle of ways to ultimately get to an action that expresses your voice and your point of view.
That's great.
So I love this question. And for me to answer it, how do I own my voice and demonstrate it? I first had to recall, or I think first you have to recognize for whom and for what your voice speaks. You know, what is it that you represent before you can own your voice and feel comfortable using your voice? So for me, I first recognized that my voice is the voice of a Black woman. And one of my good friends, and I think she might be actually on the Zoom this morning, she asked me one day, you know, well, how do you identify? Do you identify as a woman first, or do you identify as African-American or Black first? And without hesitation, for me, I said, you know, Black. I feel like that I am a Black woman. So the voice that I use when I'm communicating and when I am trying to own it is that of a Black woman. And so I always think to own it, I have to recognize that when this Black space enters into a white space, which through my work is something that happens all the time, I have to be willing to speak up. I have to be willing to speak out, and I have to be willing to bring other people along with me. And that's how I own my voice. As an attorney, I speak on behalf of mostly women because primarily I work in the domestic violence area, but I speak on behalf of people every single day. And I started realizing that I speak on behalf of other people very well, but sometimes I don't speak up on behalf of myself with that same confidence. And so that recognition is what it kind of brought it full circle to me, that I have to advocate more and realize that I'm speaking up I have to speak up for myself too. And I think that is important that we all, you know, we demonstrate using our voice at home, but then sometimes we go into the workplace and we don't really know how to, you know, how to speak up for ourselves or how to use our voice. But I think first you have to recognize for who and for what it is that you speak. And when you do that, you're able to demonstrate owning your voice on a regular basis. At least that's what I was able to do.
That's excellent. Thanks so much for sharing, both of you, your perspectives on that and your personal experiences and willingness to use your voice and then what that means to you. You know, Andy, you know, help us understand a little more. We just started to talk about this. You know, why do women struggle to self-advocate, as we talk about? Alexia just mentioned sometimes it's hard for her to advocate for herself. You know, why do we struggle to self-advocate at work, and why do women hold back?
Well, that could probably be a 7-hour conversation. What I will do is suggest here that what it is it's really the stereotypes and the biases that we experience as we're growing up and in the workplace that hold us back. For example, there's a stereotype that women are supposed to be nice and kind and sweet and modest. And we go to work, and if we don't feel that we're being nice and kind and sweet and modest, then we're going to be criticized. And so by the time we're 3 or 4 years old, if somebody said, Andy, you're a great ballerina, I would say, oh, but Barbara, she's a much better gymnast. We start deflecting this. Boys will say, yeah, I'm great. And so in the workplace, what happens is women spend a lot of time talking about their teams or others and much less comfortable talking about themselves. And so we struggle to advocate at work because of the stereotypes and the biases that we experience and we impose on ourselves, so that we limit ourselves as to what we're going to do, primarily because we're trying to walk through the gender bias minefield. What I'd like to underline here is what Alexia said about intersectionality, which is, she said that she views herself as a Black person first and a woman second. And very often what happens with women is that we're put into a bucket as if we're all the same cookie cutter girl, and we're not. And we come with all of these different social identities, and they bring with them all sorts of different stereotypes, biases. And so in navigating our way through, what we really need to do is understand that about ourselves and how that may be holding ourselves back, but also find ways that we can support other women. Think about your group of people who you're friends with, who you interact with, whether it's in the office or now mostly by email or Zoom or, Microsoft Meets or whatever. What we have to do is we have to think about the other person, bring them in, find somebody who doesn't look like you, and take the time to mentor her, to bring her along, to sponsor her, to give her ideas, to invite her to your next event, whether it's virtual or not. And we can really raise our voices by thinking about what we can do to help other women whose voices, we may not have a perfectly heard voice ourselves, but we may be heard a lot better than somebody else. And we need to identify people like that and just bring them along. Now, let me ask Tanya and Alexia. I gave one example about what a white woman might be able to do to improve the situation of her sisters. What would you recommend in your experiences that what a white woman might be able to do to help a woman of color or a Black woman?
Well, I'll speak first. I know Tanya is probably tired of speaking first. So, very often we hear, white women, and we do appreciate it, when you say, well, we want to bring you along and we want to mentor you and bring you to the tables where we sit and to our events. But also what goes along with that is coming along with us to some of our events and putting your money towards some of the things that matter to us, some of the organizations that we are a part of. And I think that is important because I think you have to, people always say, well, I have friends of color, but also ask yourself, well, how many times have I donated money or purchased a ticket or gone to an event that one of my friends of color is, an organization that they're a part of? Not just bringing them along to my groups and mentoring them that way, but I want to also learn what's important to them. And I think that's how you uplift and help us grow, because we have organizations too that we're passionate about, that we love, and we need you to come with us and to support us and to learn about our efforts in the community and the boards that we sit on that are boards primarily of Black women, or Hispanic women. So that's the way that I think, white women can use their voice and their power and their privilege to also support us in our endeavors. So that would be my short answer.
That's a fabulous answer. And that's absolutely all part of it. Tanya?
Yeah, I loved your response, Alexia. I completely agree with you. I would say what comes to mind when I was really reflecting on how I wanted to respond to this question, because I come from a place as a Latina, we're kind of layered as Hispanics, however we might self-identify, whatever language means to us, what country we came from, what region in the country do we live in. So I was raised in another country, but then primarily the Midwest. Like, that's a pretty kind of an interesting mix. And then I go to college in Texas when there's a lot of Hispanics. And then next thing you know, I was checking boxes that I didn't know I was checking. So my personal journey as a Latina woman is very personal to me, and I come at the world as Tanya first. And whatever that means, because I have a lot of different, I'm bicultural. There's a lot of ways that define who I am. But in terms of this question, Andy, for me, it's really comes down to like expanding your network. So I'm totally in line with Alexia because that is in my DNA to that concept of reciprocity is really important to me. It's just foundationally as a woman, I've got stuff going on. Thank you for coming out to support. I don't have to pull teeth for then me to go support you and come support me. Like that's just some foundational non-negotiables for me at this point in my career with the women in my world. But I would say foundationally, it's about expanding your networks. And it's not just about like race. For me, for example, I am bringing along others in different ethnicities and minority groups, not only because I'm a minority, but because I feel compelled to make an impact in my professional career. What does that mean and what does that look like? I have a big passion for bringing young women along in their careers, whether it's as an entrepreneur or through the charity that I lead with my husband. I made a commitment after I kind of had a big chapter in corporate America that I didn't want young women today to go through like the toxic relationships with females that I had coming up in my career, toxic bosses. So part of it is expanding my network, bringing other young women along so they have a better experience, encouraging them to use their voices sooner rather than later. For me, this has been a work in progress. I have been a work in progress to be this woman who came into the working world very quiet, very Hispanic stereotypes, to now making the impact that I'm making with really hard topics. So I hope that gives some takeaways for other people, but if you look at it from a place of, it's just good business and good practice to expand your networks with everybody, then that can really lead to just more fruitful opportunity, connection, et cetera.
Well, I think that's a fabulous response as well. And if I could just do a self-pitch here for a second, because Barbara had mentioned the books that I've written with my husband, Breaking Through Bias and It's Not You, It's the Workplace. And what we found when Breaking Through Bias came out, first edition, we spent a lot of time talking about what women can do to overcome, avoid, work your way around, or confront head on the stereotypes and the biases that we deal with in the workplace. And women would say to us, I understand all this, but it's the women I hate working with. And I personally had not had that experience, and asked the very first time, I'll give you an example. I said, well, can you tell me why are you saying this? And this young woman says, well, I hate working with women. I had worked with 2 women and 4 men. The men were fabulous. I love working with them. The women are such bitches. I couldn't stand it. I went to their boss and I said to their boss, I hate working with these women. And he said, fine, just work with the men. You don't like working with the women? Don't work with them. And she said, my job is great now. I love it. And I said to her, well, that's really very interesting. Can you tell me what it was that the women did different from what the men did that made their working with them so toxic? And this woman thought about it and she could not come up with an answer. Finally, she looked up at me and she said, the women treated me exactly the same way that the men did, but I expected them to be nice and kind and sweet. And when they were acting like my boss, that wasn't okay to me. And so that's what prompted us to write our book, It's Not You, It's the Workplace, where what we did is we broke those stereotypes and those biases down, and we've identified, we've identified why women can get crosswise with each other, can have problems working with each other. But it's not because the women don't want to work together. It's because the work environment makes it such. And so I would urge everybody who cares about this issue to check out It's Not You, It's the Workplace, because we took that apart and we worked on it for a couple of years to get to where we came out, which is that it's not women, it's our workplaces.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. You know, I'm just going to add something in here because I've had a couple conversations with Alexia and some of the other women on the phone, Black women here on the phone, some of them who are from West Palm Beach. And in talking to them, one of the things that came about or was a theme through a number of the conversations was encouraging women to show up as their authentic selves, that they are powerful, that they have opinions that should be heard, and that they should not try to be someone other than who they are, that we should encourage one another, women of who are of color, Black women, all of us, to show up as our authentic selves and not try to modify our lives or ourselves to be something that we're not. So
now, Nancy, I love that, but I would love to ask the question to the panel: how do we remain authentic but deliver what we want to say in a way that people can hear it, especially people that may more mainstream white males who run organizations? That's that balance, right, of being authentic and then sharing information so that we're not perceived in a certain way, but it's impactful and it can be heard and used.
Well, I'll start it because I feel like I'm Debbie Downer on so much of this today. But Barbara, you've touched on what it is exactly, what we have to focus on, which is that our number one objective is to get what we want. As Tanya said, she focuses her day by saying, what's in it for Tanya? What's true to Tanya? And the reality is that we can do that by thinking about what it is about ourselves that we need to be authentic about. And what that is, it's not necessarily how I wear my hair or what I'm wearing to a meeting or whatever. It can be, but it's really about what are the issues that I care about? What's my moral compass? What drives me? And how can I make certain that I get that across? And that sometimes might mean that I'm going to talk to somebody differently than I would speak to you, or I'm going to dress according to what I think the crowd is going to expect, or the senior leaders are going to expect, as opposed to what I feel like wearing that day. And so we have to factor into our how we can be heard and how we can stay true to ourselves. Does not mean that if I have a particular speaking style that I have to use that style every time I talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. Instead, what it means is, what can I do to get what I want out of this interaction, out of this conversation?
Mm-hmm. And to build on that, Andy, I'll just have a tiny comment. I would say, to sum up what you just said, is having strategy, right? So you are who you are. Some people might like your style or they might not, but if you have an objective of something that you want to convey and communicate and have it be effective and be heard, you can't just make it about you. You have to really think about, okay, if I catch this person at the wrong time, am I talking to him down the hall? Is this the right time? Is there a big meeting that day that maybe I was steering clear, but I want to have the courage to have this conversation? You do need a level of conviction, but part of kind of toggling your being true with your authenticity, but you have to be able to toggle and recognize that there are different styles, to Andy's point. But ultimately, I think if there's a desired end result, you need to have strategy about what the comment is, the tone of voice. Is it going to be a little tee up of an email and then you follow up in conversation, or you're going to have a phone call? What are you going to say? Have your messages down. That's what I would add to what you said, Andy. And I think Alexa,
and every day as women, we have to choose, how we want to convey our authenticity. It's not fair, but unfortunately that's what it is. And we saw that on display during the vice presidential debate. I don't mean to interject any politics, but we saw it, because for those who were watching and felt, and there were a lot of women, especially women of color, who felt like, they understood what Kamala Harris was facing. Here you are on a stage against a white male who's talking over you. How do you portray, you have to choose in that moment. Do I go toe to toe and start speaking over him and be rude, or do I remain classy so that I can convey my message to the American people so that they understand that I am not hot tempered. I am a woman who you can trust to lead the country. Every day, we're not on that scale, but every day we have to make those same type of choices when we're at work in our various professions. And I'm not saying that it's fair, because sometimes you do want to show that you can flex your muscle and I can raise my voice, but we have to remain tempered and graceful. And, it happens to me in court all of the time when I have opposing counsel, especially a male, talking down on me or being rude. And I have to decide, do I raise up and fight back, or do I remain calm so that the judge understands that I am a polite woman and I'm saying, only the facts and I'm not being emotional. So unfortunately, it's something that we have to balance as women every single day. And that's just the reality of it. I don't know that will ever change, but it is hard to be authentic. It is hard to own your voice, especially as a woman, and then also as a woman of color.
Let me just say one thing, because this is really balancing and showing something that Al and I in our work, we refer to it as the Goldilocks Dilemma, which is that women are expected to be nice and kind and sweet, as I've said before, and men are expected to be aggressive, assertive, I'm independent, going to get the job done. And when a woman behaves too, I'm going to get the job done, everybody's hair catches fire, not just the men's, but the women's hair. Who does she think she is? Mm-hmm. So what Kamala Harris did that was so amazing is that when Joe Biden turned to Trump and he said, "Man, will you shut up?" He could do that. If we had seen that in the vice presidential debate, oh my goodness, who can only imagine what would have happened? And so she was able to smile, which is what Hillary Clinton did, but she also was able to then go to the next step and say, Mr. Vice President, I'm still speaking, or I'm not finished yet. But she did it in a way that showed that she was not too aggressive, assertive, whatever, which would have made everybody crazy, not because it's not okay, it should be okay, but because of the stereotypes and the biases that we live with. So she was a master of that. And I know that there were a number of people who criticized her saying she was angry, but the reality is she was masterful.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we've had some great comments. I want to thank Christine Stone. One of the things she had shared, by the way, was how she was aware of women meeting in an organization and sharing accomplishments and ideas, and then committing to sharing that more broadly in the organization. So to really get those stories out in the company as a way to advocate for yourself, but through the voices of others. And that's that other challenge of women bragging. So sometimes it's just whatever approach is going to work to start getting our voices heard. Again, being more strategic, that I thought was a great example I wanted to make sure I shared.
Does anyone have any questions as we just look through the chat? If not, we can move on to some other questions. Chris Broderick, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was thinking as in that last kind of round that we were talking through, that while I wonder to what extent the strategies, Tanya, that you mentioned before you go into a conversation, do we really need to spend some time and think about that audience that it is that we're trying to reach and understand what aspects are most important to them, and then how does what we're looking to accomplish fit in with those goals of theirs? And therefore, let's make sure we're building that into our approach as well.
Yes, so I would say that a lot of my training, Chris, had come from my corporate existence and a lot of trainings around being an effective communicator, whether it's in my field as a marketer or just how to impact and influence, a huge cross-functional team, right? So when it's just, me, myself, and I, yes, we all can use our voice and try to move some things along, but where we can make a much bigger impact is when you can bring others along with you, right? So that does require some mastery, some strategy. And I would say that it's all kind of in the spirit of preparation. So if you're trying to have a good, effective conversation with your manager, or you have a nonprofit and you're trying to influence and you're going in for a big ask, all those pieces require to think about that person's mindset, what matters to him or her. You're still moving forward and using your voice to create that meaningful connection or that impact, but it is about kind of thinking about just like, I've got something I want to communicate and express. Well, I'm a big believer that in adding value to every exchange. So whether or not, let's say, for example, I raised an issue with Advertising Age magazine yesterday. I didn't like their social media posts. They're promoting what's the future of advertising. And I see their social media posts with corresponding landing page of just, no offense, but just all Caucasian people, 2 women and 5 men. And I'm thinking they're talking about a topic of the future of an industry where, we're still mass marketing to a lot of different cultures in our country. I have issue with this. So I very tactfully sent a constructive email, not sounding off how I would want to with my authentic self, but much more of, hey, I'm really disappointed. I'm still seeing this. Here's some feedback. By the way, if you have a committee that supports diverse efforts, please include me because I'd love to be part of your planning process, like adding value and being part of the solution, right? And the response was timely. First, I got a response, which, sometimes it's out there in the universe. You might not hear back. I knew it kind of hit some points. The message was heard. They knew I was being polite. And they were very respectful in their response, and they were kind of appalled and gave a little bit of reasons why that ended up happening. And in a marketing world, you can see how that can happen. And same with Barbara and Nancy, like they didn't get all the headshots in on time. And I wrote back, I know most of the time it's not intentional, but I want you to know, like, here's kind of the optics, and optics are reality. So it's about being constructive, having strategy, offering a solution, and adding value for, I believe, makes like that critical impact. So hopefully that helps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had, go ahead. Someone offered a question in the chat. What are some ideas to change the environment such that it's not necessary for a woman to be at a masterclass level to be accepted and heard, right? I mean, it is good to use strategy, but it's, challenging.
Well, part of the problem is that we have to, all of the things that we've talked about so far are what women can do today in gender biased workplaces. And we've talked about that because that's what we can do to help our careers today. That's what we can do to help our communities today. That's what we can do to help our friends and loved ones today. But that should not suggest that there aren't also 2 other trains leaving the station. One of them is that we need to get men involved, because men, since many of them run the companies and the world that we're trying to, be part of, we need their support. We need them to understand it's a problem. But the other part of it is another train leaving the station, which is the organizations themselves need to change. And there are various ways that organizations need to change. I saw in the chat box a comment from Tanya, you start with small steps. The reality is that is one of the key pieces, because if you start with small steps, then you can all celebrate the victory and then move on to the next small step. Very important. But what we have to do is we have to get our organizations to take the subjectivity out of the evaluation process. And we have to make it so that a guy can't say, well, I don't like working with Tanya because she's abrasive, or she's this, or she's that, or I don't like her. When that has nothing to do with how is she doing the job. And so one of the key things that Al and I in our research, we've come up with a 7-step program, what organizations need to do. And we've included that in the end of It's Not You, It's the Workplace, where we've come up with eliminating subjectivity. Information is power. Get the information out there. Get men to participate as allies. Don't let people think quickly, because when we think with our guts, we think with stereotypes and biases. We really need to slow thinking down. And that's sort of counterintuitive for so many of us who live our lives thinking that we've got to get it done right this minute. And that's one of the big problems we see in our government right now, which is that people are thinking that my gut is better than your careful, thought out solution.
And I think that, for me, that also speaks to what Alexia was saying earlier, that we have to give some thought to what our voice represents and how we want to express and convey those thoughts rather than.
May I add one thing, Nancy? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing. To the person that asked about being heard, not having to be in a master class, I think that's a great question. So, it's kind of like if you're watching TV and there's a lot of noise around in the room, what you do is you turn up the volume so that you can hear the program that you're watching, right? But if you're trying to be heard in a professional setting, turning up your volume or amplifying does not mean speaking louder. To me, it means speaking stronger. And so I think sometimes as women, we tend to dilute our voices by the word choice that we use. I had a situation where I confided in one of my friends. I said, every time I'm in this certain meeting, I feel as though I might have a great idea. And this is my first time actually being at those types of meetings. And I said, I feel like I have a great idea, but I just get drowned out by the men in the room. And so I said, I gotta figure out how to amplify my voice. And so now, where I say, hey, I'll get ready to, because I found that the men, they just start talking, where I'm kind of like raising my finger, like waiting on someone to acknowledge me. So I just started speaking, and instead of saying, hey, well, maybe I think we should do this, or what about, I just say, hey, we need to do this. Have you guys thought about that? Because otherwise they were just drowning me out and I was sick of it. So I think in a practical way, we have to learn how to strengthen our voice, not be louder, but to talk stronger. When you send that email, I go through and I edit my emails. Usually I have a three edit rule. If I'm sending an email and I want to make sure that it's impactful, I usually edit it 3 times, because I'll go back and I'll keep reading it until I get the wording just right to make sure that it conveys exactly what my message is. And I think that's important, how we use words to express what we're trying to say. And I'm sure Tanya would agree with this in her profession. You only got one shot to say what you mean. And that's how you amplify your voice and make sure that you're heard.
Great point. Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'm just reading monitoring some of the chats here. That language is from Tanya. Language is definitely critical. And I think, to your point, stronger is more effective than louder. So we had talked about some of the things that we can do to move forward, that women can do to move forward and to own their voice and their power. Alexia, you had mentioned earlier about, again, being mindful of what our voice represents. Tanya, you had mentioned strategy. Is there anything else that, like right now, women coming away, the 60 women or 65 women on the phone, what is one action we can all take today to really make our voices count and matter right now?
I think for me, I wrote down 3 things that are easy to remember. We can show up, speak up, and pull another woman up with us. And that's the way for us to make sure that we're owning our voices and we're empowering other women to own theirs as well.
Awesome.
Great. My contribution, I also had 3 things, but not as succinct as yours. As a marketing person, Alexia, I love it. I want to kind of impart this as we close out our session. When it comes to our voice, I know I've certainly been rewarded for this. It's about having courage. it is scary to put yourself out there sometimes in whatever way that might look like, whether it's you're raising an issue to your school's principal because you don't like how hybrid model's going on or whatever it is. It starts with courage. And what I've kind of, as I've progressed, as my voice has gotten louder and stronger, I've also been a lot more courageous. I don't have as much self-doubt. And guess what, you guys? The more courage that I have and the more like bold my message is, the more I'm rewarded for it. And what's really interesting is how people are like, wow, I never thought about this concept of courage until people started coming to me that, wow, that's so courageous. And I was like, oh, like I'm just coming at this from a place of experience or pain or whatever that might look like. So I just want to remind everybody that if you work on courage or whatever it is, so you don't hold back and you're able to demonstrate and articulate something that's important to you and then using your voice as a result of that, I really encourage everyone to kind of keep working on yourself if that's something that is a challenge, because we've all been there. This courageous lioness woman over here was not always the Tanya that exists. That's about it.
Andy?
I'm going to wrap up by just saying, I'll do 3 things too. Vote, and everybody you know who can vote to vote, and find ways to help support others and encourage others to get out to vote, whether it's sending postcards, working with an organization, helping. One of the interesting things that I heard on public radio the other morning is an organization that's already staffed 30,000 poll workers with high school kids who aren't even old enough to vote. Mm-hmm. Because this is an opportunity both to deal with the pandemic where the older people are less comfortable going out and doing it, and the creating a groundswell of support and concern and thoughts about our democracy. So vote, vote, and vote are my 3.
So you basically summed up my closing, Andy. But before I get to some final words, I want to really just thank you, Alexia and Tanya, for sharing, your expertise, for being vulnerable here with us today, sharing your insight and your experiences with us. Greater momentum, being mindful of what our voices represent, and aligning our words with our actions are great steps we can all take to make our voices heard and matter. I think it goes without saying that women need to and must continue to confidently speak our truth and to enter public and private spaces with strength, boldness, grit, and determination. And, let's not forget that owning our voices and advocating for ourselves, it's essential that we advocate for one another, for equality, and for women whose voices have been suppressed or silenced altogether. We rise by lifting other women up. So in our recap, we will be sure to share Tanya, Alexia, and Andy's information. I'd ask how women can connect with you, but that would be a little bit too long. We want to be mindful of everyone's time today, so we'll share that in the recap. Again, we are so grateful to the 3 of you for your support of the Women's Forum and to for your support of women's personal and professional success.